My name is Monica Reyes. I am 29 years old, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that sacrifice can become a prison when the people you love turn the key against you. I worked 2 jobs since I was 16, bussing tables through the night, hauling boxes in a warehouse before dawn, living on caffeine and calluses, while my family rested on the shoulders I thought were strong enough to carry them. For years, I believed love meant giving everything without asking anything back. But now, I know it only meant giving them the tools to destroy me. The moment of revelation came not with a scream, but with the quiet rustle of paper. A folder pulled from a drawer that should have been locked. A folder that made my whole world tilt sideways. Sitting in my lawyer's office, my hands trembling as the ink blurred before my eyes, I finally realized that every lost dream, every sleepless night, every bill I paid while they laughed in warm rooms without me was part of a theft far more brutal than money. They did not just steal my youth, they erased my identity. They gambled away my future, and then had the audacity to kiss my siblings on the forehead and whisper that everything would be fine. It was not fine. It was never fine. I had swallowed bitterness for more than a decade, telling myself it was duty, telling myself they would one day appreciate me. Yet what stared back from those documents was the truth. I was never the daughter they loved. I was the safety net they drained. The betrayal burned hotter than any exhaustion I had ever known, because exhaustion fades after sleep, but betrayal brands itself into the bone. As the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, I felt both shattered and sharpened. Shattered because everything I thought I knew about where I came from had been a lie. Sharpened because now I had the proof in my hand, proof they could never laugh away. Proof that turned my sacrifices into evidence, my pain into testimony. In that instant, I stopped being their workhorse and became something else entirely, the woman who would drag their secrets into the light. This is not just a story about survival, it is a story about exposure, about how one hidden file rewrote the script of my life. And as I leaned back in that chair, the pages shaking in my grip, I swore I would never again let them define me. They had taken enough. Now it was my turn to take everything back. I grew up in a small industrial town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the smokestacks always left a gray haze over the sky and people worked the same jobs their parents had before them. Our house sat on a cracked street where kids played basketball on bent hoops and neighbors borrowed sugar and never returned it. To outsiders, we might have looked like any other working-class family. 2 parents, 3 children, dinners around the table, but inside those walls the balance of sacrifice was never equal. My adoptive father, Thomas, had worked maintenance jobs all his life, fixing what was broken for people who never remembered his name. My adoptive mother, Linda, kept house with an iron jaw and a talent for convincing outsiders she was selfless. My older brother, Victor, 5 years ahead of me, carried himself like a prince, though he had no crown. My younger sister, Vanessa, 3 years behind, fluttered from one dream to another dance art travel funded by money I never saw. And then there was me, Monica, the one in the middle, the one who became the glue, the mule, the unpaid caretaker. From early on, I was praised for being responsible. Teachers wrote it in report cards. Neighbors told my mother, "You've raised such a reliable girl." At first, those words felt like medals. Later, they felt like shackles. By 16, when other kids were giggling at football games or planning prom, I was rolling silverware in the back of a diner until midnight, then hauling crates in a grocery warehouse before the morning sun came up. My paycheck never even touched my hands. Linda and Thomas said it was for the family, and I believed them because belief was easier than rebellion. The years that should have been mine slipped away in a blur of double shifts and unpaid sacrifices. While Victor was given a used car at 18 and sent to college without lifting a finger, I was warned that my dreams were too expensive. While Vanessa was taken on trips out of state to broaden her horizons, I was told to cover the utility bills because someone has to be practical. Practical became my cage. There were moments I thought maybe it would change. I still remember the day I got an acceptance letter to a community college program in business administration. My hands shook as I showed it to my mother, hoping she would smile, hoping she would say, "We'll find a way." Instead, she sighed and said, "Maybe next year, Monica. Right now, we need you here. Next year never came. Every dollar I earned was absorbed into the household. Medical bills, mortgages, car repairs, for Victor, supplies for Vanessa, groceries, electric, water, gas. I was the silent account they never had to replenish. And when I dared to complain, Thomas would look at me with tired eyes and say, "You're strong enough to handle this. Your brother and sister aren't." The words were meant to flatter, but they cut like knives. Being strong was not a gift, it was a sentence. Still, part of me held on to hope. I thought if I proved myself useful long enough, they would one day look at me with the same pride they gave Victor when he barely passed a class, or the same affection they poured on Vanessa when she flitted home from another failed internship. But pride and affection were luxuries I was never afforded. My reward was more responsibility, more silence, more invisibility. There is a particular loneliness in being surrounded by family who only sees what you can provide. I carried groceries into a kitchen where my name was not called with warmth but with demands. I covered bills and missed deadlines for my own dreams, telling myself that one day they would understand. But what I did not know then was that their silence hid something deeper than neglect. It hid a secret that would twist every memory of sacrifice into something darker. It hid the truth of who I really was and why my place in that family had always felt more like servitude than belonging. By the time I turned 16, responsibility wasn't a choice. It was the air I breathed. I remember clocking in at the diner on a Friday night apron already stained before I even picked up my first table. My classmates were dressing up for homecoming, slipping corsages onto each other's wrists. I was refilling ketchup bottles, balancing trays of greasy food, and forcing a smile for tips that would never be mine to keep. At 2 a.m., when the last customer staggered out, I mopped floors until my back ached. 4 hours later, while the world still slept, I was unloading boxes in the warehouse, hands raw from cardboard cuts. 2 jobs, 16 years old, and I told myself it was temporary. But temporary turned permanent, and permanent turned into identity. Each paycheck disappeared into a void called family expenses. My mother, Linda, would hold out her hand before I could even fold the bills. "It's for the mortgage," she'd say, "or the electric's due." My father, Thomas, would nod as if it were an immutable law of the universe. But I started to notice a pattern. The mortgage always seemed to be due. The bills always just a little higher. Yet somehow there was enough money for Vanessa's art lessons, enough for Victor's textbooks, enough for dinners out that I was never invited to. At 17, I collapsed in the warehouse, heat exhaustion pounding in my skull. I came home pale and trembling, desperate for sympathy, but Linda only frowned and said, "You can't afford to miss shifts, Monica. We're counting on you." Her words weren't cruel in tone, but in their weight they were devastating. I wasn't her daughter in that moment. I was her employee, her laborer, unpaid and unthanked. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was paraded in front of me like a cruel joke. On Victor's 18th birthday, they presented him with a set of car keys to a used sedan. He puffed out his chest, grinning, while Thomas patted him on the back. That same week, when I asked for $200 to cover a semester at community college, Linda snapped, "Stop being selfish. We can't throw money at your whims when your siblings have real futures. Real futures. As if mine had been disqualified before I even began." I tried not to resent Vanessa, but resentment crept in anyway. She floated from passion to passion, dance, painting, photography, each new hobby funded without question. When she wanted to take a summer course out of state, Thomas drained another account to make it happen. When I asked if maybe I could take one class in night school, Linda scoffed. "You don't have the time, and besides, you're better at supporting others." My dreams weren't just ignored, they were actively dismantled. There were nights I'd come home uniform still reeking of fried food and hear laughter drifting from the living room. Vanessa showing off her latest sketches, Victor bragging about a barely passed exam, Linda and Thomas clapping as though these were monumental achievements. I would stand in the doorway, invisible, holding the groceries I had just paid for, waiting for someone to notice. They never did. At 19, I watched Victor flunk a course because he skipped classes to party. Instead of consequences, he got sympathy. Linda pressed money into his hand for a tutor Thomas told him not to stress. That same month, I was short on rent for the tiny room I rented to have a slice of independence. When I asked if I could keep $50 from my own paycheck, Linda's eyes narrowed. "You think you're entitled? This family would collapse without you. Don't you dare hoard money while we're struggling. Struggling yet. Vanessa had new art supplies, and Victor had a new gaming console. Every insult was disguised as expectation. You're so strong, Monica. We can always rely on you. You don't need help the way your brother and sister do. At first, I swallowed those words like praise, but over time, they curdled into poison. Strength wasn't a compliment. It was their excuse to use me until I broke. At 21, I thought maybe things would shift. Thomas promised me that once his workers' comp case settled, he'd repay every cent I had poured into the household. I even dared to imagine enrolling in school again, maybe studying business or law. I circled classes in the community college catalog like a child circling toys before Christmas. But when the settlement came, the money vanished as quickly as it arrived. Victor transferred to a better dorm. Vanessa took another summer program. And me, I was told, "Next year, Monica. We'll make it happen." Next year never came. The bitterness inside me grew heavy like stones in my pockets. I started documenting everything: receipts, pay stubs, bills in my name that I never agreed to cover. I told myself it was for bookkeeping, but in truth, it was survival. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just unfair, it was theft. One memory still slices me open. I had saved secretly for months, tucking away $5 bills from tips when Linda wasn't looking. I wanted to buy myself a used laptop, something that would let me study online in stolen hours. The day I finally had enough, Linda found the envelope hidden under my mattress. She confronted me with fury. "You're hiding money while this family suffers. How dare you?" She confiscated the cash and used it for household needs. That week, Vanessa came home with a new camera. At 25, my faith in them was hanging by a thread. I still clung to small hopes that they might one day thank me, that perhaps I'd earn a place beside Victor and Vanessa as an equal. That illusion shattered on my birthday. I dragged myself through a double shift, came home exhausted, only to find the house lit up, music spilling through the windows. My heart leapt. Maybe they remembered. But as I stepped inside, I saw Vanessa glowing in a new dress, friends gathered around a cake with her name scrawled in icing. They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They had erased it entirely, replacing it with hers. I stood in the corner invisible until Victor caught sight of me. He smirked, lifted his glass, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're not a guest here, Monica. You're the workhorse." Laughter rippled through the room. My chest burned with shame. That night, alone in my room, I opened the box of receipts and notes I had collected over the years. I spread them across the bed like a paper graveyard of my youth. Bills with my handwriting, checks with my signature, debts that weren't mine. It struck me then that I had been keeping evidence, not just records. My sacrifices had not built a family. They had built a case. By 29, I was hollowed out but burning inside. Every shift, every paycheck, every broken promise had become a weight on my shoulders. And though I didn't know it yet, the hidden file that would expose everything was waiting in the shadows, ready to shatter what little illusion I still clung to. My life had been an endless escalation of sacrifice turned betrayal, and I was standing at the edge of a revelation that would finally explain why I had always been the expendable one. Turning 25 was supposed to be a milestone at least. That was what I told myself as the day approached. Quarter of a century, the start of a new chapter, maybe even a sign that things would shift. I had imagined a simple dinner, maybe a cake, even just a happy birthday spoken without sarcasm. Instead, I got silence. That morning, I woke up early after another night shift. My body ached, but I forced myself into jeans and a sweater, trying to shake the hope clinging to me. I went to work, clocked in at the diner, served customers who laughed and toasted and made plans. I watched them from behind the counter, feeling invisible, but still thinking, maybe tonight. Maybe they remembered. When my shift finally ended, I walked home with sore feet and a fragile smile. But as I approached the house, I saw cars lining the driveway, lights glowing in every window, music pulsing through the walls. My chest fluttered with anticipation. Maybe it was for me. Maybe they had planned a surprise. I pushed open the door and the truth hit like a punch. The living room was full of balloons. A cake sat on the table with "Happy Birthday." Vanessa written in bright frosting, and my younger sister stood in the center, twirling in a new dress. Friends clapped, Victor cheered, and Linda and Thomas beamed with pride. My name was nowhere, not even in a whisper. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching my purse strap, waiting for someone to notice. Vanessa laughed, Victor popped open a soda, and the music swelled. Finally, Victor caught sight of me. His grin curled cruel. "Look who's here," he said loudly, raising his glass. "Our workhorse. You're not a guest here, Monica. You're the reason the lights stay on." The room erupted in laughter. My face burned. I wanted to scream, to throw the cake against the wall, but my voice stuck. I turned and walked down the hall to my room, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, the celebration continued, muffled by walls that felt like prison bars. Inside my room, I sank to the floor, staring at my calloused hands. I had paid for the electricity keeping their party lit. I had covered the grocery bills that filled their plates. I had funded their joy while my own milestones were erased. Tears blurred my vision, but anger burned hotter. That night, I pulled out the battered box from under my bed. Inside were years of receipts, pay stubs, notes, scribbled on envelopes, proof of everything I had covered, every sacrifice that had vanished without acknowledgement. I spread them across my bed, page after page, a paper trail of servitude. It looked less like family responsibility and more like financial abuse. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind, why? Why was I the one chosen to bear everything? Why was I invisible while they basked in comfort? The cruelty of the birthday humiliation sharpened the question into suspicion. There had to be more than favoritism, more than unfairness. There had to be a reason. I remembered overhearing Linda once late at night whispering to Thomas in the kitchen. "She'll never know," Linda had said. At the time, I brushed it off as paranoia, but now it echoed in my mind like a warning bell. She'll never know. Know what? The house was quiet the next morning, empty after Vanessa's party stretched late into the night. As I cleaned the kitchen, bitterness gnawed at me. Dishes piled high, confetti scattered across the floor, frosting smeared on plates, evidence of a celebration that excluded me. I slammed a cupboard door shut too hard, and something rattled. The drawer beneath the cabinet stuck slightly ajar. My heart thudded. I knelt and pulled. Inside was a stack of old files, dusty, worn, as if they hadn't been touched in years. I froze. The label on the top folder read my name. My breath caught. I reached out, hands trembling. The folder was heavier than paper should feel, as though it carried the weight of years I hadn't lived. A chill crept over me, both dread and certainty. I knew with a clarity that shook me that this was it, the answer to why my life had been carved into sacrifice while theirs had been paved with comfort. I didn't open it then. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the folder against my chest, heartbeat roaring in my ears. The house around me felt different now, not a home, but a stage built on lies. I had spent years believing I was invisible because I wasn't good enough. But maybe I had been invisible because they wanted me blind. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow I'll know." And for the first time in years, hope and fear braided together inside me, pulling me toward a truth I could no longer avoid. The next morning, the house was quiet. Vanessa was sleeping in after her party, Victor had gone out, and Linda and Thomas were nowhere to be seen. The air felt heavy, but my resolve was heavier. I locked my bedroom door, placed the folder on my desk, and sat staring at it as if it were a living thing daring me to open it. My fingers hovered for a long moment before I finally flipped the cover. Inside were documents, official stamped signed papers that told a story I had never been allowed to hear. My eyes raced across the first page, confusion sharpening into disbelief. Adoption papers. My name, Monica Reyes, printed clearly beneath the words, "Adoptive Child." My pulse thudded in my ears. Adoptive child. I read the words again and again, the letters blurring into shapes that no longer made sense. I wasn't Linda and Thomas's daughter. I was someone else's. I turned the page, and the pieces began to fall into place. My biological mother's name leapt out at me, Elena Martinez. 27 years old at the time of death. My biological father's name followed Carlos Reyes, deceased, when I was only a toddler. The papers said I was entrusted to Linda Elena's sister with guardianship signed over after my mother's accident. Guardianship, not motherhood. My chest constricted. Every memory shifted, refracted through this revelation. Every lecture about duty, every dismissal of my needs, every time they told me I was different from Victor and Vanessa, it wasn't favoritism alone. It was because I was never truly theirs. But the folder wasn't done. Beneath the adoption papers lay financial records, trust documents. My father Carlos had left behind a life insurance policy and a savings account in my name. Nearly $180,000 set aside with explicit instructions to be used solely for my education and future. I covered my mouth with my hand as a sob escaped. That money could have given me freedom, could have lifted the weight I had carried since 16. Instead, withdrawal slips told the rest of the story. Transfers made by Linda and Thomas over the years, funds diverted into household accounts, checks signed for Victor's tuition for Vanessa's programs. Line after line, the proof of theft glared at me. They hadn't just ignored me, they had stolen the very future my parents had died to protect. My hands shook as I reached the last item, a yellowed envelope tucked between the documents. My name was written across it in faded ink, to my daughter, Monica. My vision blurred as I tore it open and unfolded the fragile paper inside. The handwriting was careful, looping the ink slightly smudged. My sweet Monica, if you are reading this, it means I could not stay to raise you. Please know that leaving you was never my choice. You were the light of my short life, the reason I kept going on the hardest days. I wanted to see you grow, to see you laugh, to watch you become the woman I know you are meant to be. But if I cannot, then I want you to know that I tried to give you the future you deserve. I asked my sister Linda to take you in to keep you safe. I begged her to love you as her own. I left money in trust, money meant to give you choices I never had. Education, a home, freedom. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not worthy of those things. They are yours by right because you are mine. If life has been hard, if you have been asked to carry more than your share, I am so sorry. That was never what I wanted for you. You are not a servant. You are not invisible. You are my daughter Monica, and you carry my love with you always. Be brave. Take what is yours. Live free. Love forever, Mom. Tears splashed onto the page as I clutched the letter to my chest. My mother's voice echoed through the words, cutting through years of silence and erasure. She had wanted me to be free. She had trusted her sister, my so-called mother, to protect me, and Linda had betrayed that trust, had betrayed blood, had betrayed me. Rage surged through me, hotter than any anger I had ever felt. The humiliation, the endless work, the laughter at my expense, it all crystallized into a truth too sharp to ignore. They had known all along. Every time they told me I was selfish for wanting more, every time they called me strong so they could use me, every time they brushed aside my dreams, it was all because they were hiding what was rightfully mine. I sat at the desk surrounded by papers, the letter trembling in my hand, and a single thought roared in my mind. They stole everything. The next hours blurred. I scanned the documents, took photos with my phone, stacked them neatly back into the folder. My hands moved mechanically, but inside I was on fire. For years I had been their workhorse. Now I had the evidence to expose them, to take back what belonged to me. When the front door opened later that day and Linda's voice called out, I hid the folder beneath my jacket and slipped out the back door. My heart hammered as I walked down the street, the weight of the truth pressing against my ribs. I wasn't going to let them bury this secret again. That night, lying in my tiny rented room, I read the letter over and over. Each time the words seared deeper. You are not a servant. You are not invisible. You are my daughter. My mother's voice, silenced by death, had broken through years of manipulation. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her too. By the time the sun rose, the decision was made. The girl who had worked herself to the bone for scraps was gone. In her place was a woman with proof, with a voice, with nothing left to lose. And Linda, Thomas, Victor, and Vanessa were about to learn what it meant when the invisible one finally stepped into the light. I didn't storm into the living room with the folder in my hand. I had learned too well that explosions gave them excuses. No, I waited until evening when Linda and Thomas sat together on the couch, the television humming, and Victor scrolled on his phone while Vanessa painted her nails. A perfect tableau of comfort built on my broken back. I stepped into the room, quietly, folder clutched to my chest. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 4 heads turned. Linda raised an eyebrow. Thomas frowned. Victor smirked, and Vanessa barely looked up. What now? Monica. Linda sighed. If it's about money again? It is about money. I cut her off louder than I had ever dared. Their eyes flicked to me, surprised. I placed the folder on the coffee table and flipped it open with a snap. And it's about lies. Victor laughed under his breath. What, did you keep another box of receipts? My hands trembled, but I pulled out the first document and slapped it onto the table. Adoption papers. My adoption papers. You never told me I wasn't your daughter. Silence dropped heavy. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's polish brush froze mid-stroke. Linda's lips tightened. You don't understand, Linda began. No, I said sharply. I understand perfectly. I understand that my real parents, Elena Martinez and Carlos Reyes, left me in your care because they trusted you. And I understand that my father left me a trust fund nearly $180,000 to secure my future. Money that was meant for me. I slammed down the withdrawal slips line after line of theft. Money you drained to fund Victor's tuition, Vanessa's hobbies, this entire household. Linda's face drained of color. Monica. You, what? I snapped. You thought I'd never find out. You thought I'd just keep working myself into the ground while you stole everything my parents left me. Thomas finally spoke, voice low. You were provided for. We gave you a home. A home. My laugh was sharp and bitter. A home where I worked 2 jobs since I was 16, where my birthdays were forgotten, where I was nothing but your free labor. That isn't a home. That's exploitation. Victor leaned back, smirking. So what, you gonna sue us? You don't have the guts. My hands shook as I pulled the final piece from the folder, the letter. I unfolded it carefully, the paper fragile under my fingers. I don't need guts. I have this. My voice cracked as I held it up. A letter from my mother. My real mother. Do you want to hear what she wrote? No one answered. The silence was thick, choking. So I read, You are not a servant. You are not invisible. You are my daughter Monica, and you carry my love with you always. Be brave, take what is yours, live free. By the time I finished, tears blurred the ink, but my voice was clear. She trusted you, Linda. Her own sister. She begged you to love me as your own, and you betrayed her. You didn't just steal from me, you betrayed her memory. Linda's face crumpled, but no apology came. Thomas stared at the floor. Victor scoffed, but his smirk wavered. Vanessa whispered, I didn't know. But the words rang hollow. I gathered the papers back into the folder, my movements precise, final. I'm done being your workhorse. I'm done being invisible. I've already made copies, and tomorrow I'll be with a lawyer. You wanted me silent, but silence ends tonight. I stood. My knees shook, but my spine was straighter than ever before. This house was built on lies, and now those lies are collapsing. I won't carry you anymore. Not another bill, not another shift, not another ounce of my life. For once, no one had anything to say. Their power had always been in my silence. And now that I had spoken, the walls they had built began to crack. I walked out, the folder pressed tight against me, and for the first time in years, the night air felt like freedom. The very next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office with the folder pressed tight against my chest. The brass plaque on the door read Rivera and Associates Family Law. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry, but I forced myself to step inside. The receptionist led me to a modest conference room where a woman in a navy blazer greeted me with a firm handshake. I'm Attorney Rivera, she said. You must be Monica. I laid the folder on the table, every page trembling as I slid it toward her. I think my family has been stealing from me for years. This proves it. This. She leafed through the papers, her brow tightening. Adoption records, trust fund documents, bank statements, withdrawal slips. When she reached my mother's letter, she paused, her eyes softening. Monica, she said gently, this is not just suspicion. This is evidence. My heart pounded. So I can fight this. You can do more than fight, Rivera said. You can reclaim what's yours. The weeks that followed blurred into strategy sessions and court filings. Rivera explained that Linda and Thomas, as guardians, had a fiduciary duty to protect my inheritance. Using it for anyone else, Victor, Vanessa, even themselves, was a breach of trust, a crime. We compiled everything, my pay stubs showing years of contributions, records of withdrawals from the trust receipts of tuition and art programs funded by money that was never theirs. When the court date arrived, I stood outside the courthouse in a plain black dress, the weight of years pressing on me. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. Rivera walked beside me, calm and assured. "They've hidden behind your silence for too long," she said. "Today you speak with the law on your side." Inside the courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Linda and Thomas sat at the defendant's table. Victor slouched behind them, Vanessa pale and wide-eyed. They looked smaller than I'd ever seen them, stripped of the power they once wielded in whispers and guilt. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the room to order. Rivera laid out the case with precision. She showed the adoption papers, the trust documents, the withdrawal slips. She read aloud my mother's letter, her voice steady but carrying emotion that made the room still. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that the money had been used for household needs, that they had provided me with shelter and food. But Rivera countered swiftly. Shelter and food are the bare minimum a guardian provides. What they did was siphon an inheritance meant solely for Monica into luxuries and education for their biological children. That is theft, plain and simple. I sat rigid, my fists clenched in my lap. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth. I told the court about the double shifts, the bills shoved into my hands, the birthdays erased the humiliation that carved into my bones. My voice cracked but did not break. "I thought I was invisible," I said. But I wasn't invisible. I was silenced by people who wanted me powerless. By the time I stepped down, Linda couldn't meet my eyes. The verdict came swift and clear. The judge ruled that Linda and Thomas had violated their fiduciary duty. They were ordered to repay the stolen funds, every cent of the $180,000 plus damages and interest. Their accounts were frozen pending restitution. The judge's voice was final. "This court does not condone the exploitation of a child, adopted or otherwise. Monica Reyes is entitled to justice." I breathed out a shuddering sob. For once, the scales had tipped in my favor. Outside the courthouse, reporters snapped photos, microphones thrust forward. I shielded my face, but Rivera answered firmly. "This case is about accountability. Families do not have the right to rob those they are meant to protect." In the weeks that followed, the consequences unraveled. Linda and Thomas were forced to sell their house to cover the restitution. Victor dropped out of college when tuition funds dried up. Vanessa's art programs ended abruptly. The pedestal they had built on stolen money crumbled beneath them. Meanwhile, the check from the court settlement landed in my hands. For the first time, my name was on money that was mine alone. It wasn't just numbers, it was proof that I mattered. Proof that my parents' love had not been erased. Proof that justice could cut through betrayal. I opened a new account in my own name. I enrolled in classes, finally buying the textbooks with my own card. Each page I turned felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. And at night, when doubt crept in, I unfolded my mother's letter, tracing the words with my fingertips. "Be brave. Take what is yours. Live free." I was doing exactly that. The house I once called home was sold within months of the court ruling. I drove by one evening, the windows dark, a realtor's sign hammered into the lawn. For years, that place had been my prison, every brick heavy with silence and demands. Now it stood hollow, stripped of its power over me. I didn't stop the car. I didn't need to. I had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment downtown, the kind with creaky floors and sunlight streaming through thin curtains. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. For the first time, I turned the key in the lock and felt freedom rather than dread. I bought my own dishes, painted the walls in soft colors, filled the shelves with secondhand books that smelled like possibility. Each small choice was a rebellion against the years when I had no choices at all. The restitution money changed everything. I enrolled in business administration classes at the community college I had once been denied. Walking onto campus with a backpack slung over my shoulder, I felt both terrified and alive. I was surrounded by students younger than me, carefree in ways I had never been, but I didn't feel out of place. I felt powerful. Every lecture, every assignment was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building for myself. Work was still part of my life, but it no longer defined me. I kept my diner job part-time, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remind myself of how far I had come. When customers snapped their fingers impatiently, I didn't crumble inside. I smiled, thinking, this is temporary. This is choice, not chains. Victor avoided me completely. He dropped out, vanished into excuses and bitterness. Vanessa tried once to call her voice trembling as she said, "I didn't know Monica. I swear I didn't." I listened in silence, then said quietly, "Knowing or not knowing doesn't erase what happened. I can't carry this family anymore." And I hung up. Linda sent a letter, short, defensive, laced with justifications. She wrote, "We gave you everything you should be grateful." I folded it neatly, slid it into a drawer, and never replied. Gratitude had been their leash. I was free of it now. But the letter that mattered most was the one from Elena. I framed it, placed it on my desk where I studied late into the night. When exhaustion hit, when doubts whispered that I was too broken too late, I read her words, "Be brave. Take what is yours. Live free." My mother's love, carried through time, was the compass guiding me forward. One evening, months after the verdict, I attended a workshop at the college for students overcoming adversity. I stood up to share my story, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. Faces in the audience, some young, some lined with age, watched me as I spoke of betrayal, of stolen futures, of fighting back. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. Strangers came up afterward telling me I had given them hope. I realized then that my story wasn't just about survival. It was about visibility. For too long, I had been invisible in my own life. Now, by speaking, I could make sure others knew they weren't alone. On my 29th birthday, I sat in my apartment with a small cake I had bought myself. I lit the candle, whispered a wish, not for wealth, not for revenge, but for peace. I blew it out and felt tears stream down my cheeks, not from sorrow, but from relief. The girl who had once been erased had grown into a woman who could no longer be silenced. If you're listening to this, maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you've carried the weight of family betrayal or felt invisible in your own home. Let me tell you this, you are not invisible. You are not a servant. You deserve freedom, love, and dignity. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe because stories like ours deserve to be heard, and together we remind each other that justice, even after years of silence, is possible. And as I close my eyes each night, I carry my mother's words with me like a prayer, a promise, a vow. Be brave. Take what is yours. Live free.